Hello and welcome to my first YouTube video about Henry VII's foreign policy. Now this is going to be a bit rushed because I was basically just using it for my revision and my revision only. If anyone else wants to use it, feel free to do so. Now, if we look at this beautiful mind map sort of thing down here, it's actually 3 timelines going over all of, well, the most important parts of Henry VII's foreign policy. Starting at the top over here in 1485, going all the way down to 1505, and in some parts 1506. Now Henry VII with his foreign policy had 4 main aims: develop trade and the economy, avoid war, defeat pretenders and rebels, and secure the dynasty recognition and marriage, and to secure the dynasty through marriage. Now we're going to go over each one of his aims and see his failures and his successes. Now if we start over with developing trade and the economy and avoiding war, we can actually see he did, there's a few areas in which he failed, especially in his earlier years. For example, the Breton Crisis. So before he became king, Henry Tudor was on the run basically in Brittany, in France. And the Duke of Brittany actually helped him considerably to survive, and therefore he felt quite close to Brittany. So when France wanted to absorb Brittany into their empire, Henry VII wanted to support them. However, he did want to avoid war with France. So what was actually really good about the Treaty of Verdun in the February of 1489 was that Brittany paid for the English troops that were helping to fight the French. So even though it was a failure in the sense that he was forced to go to war with France, it was actually a success in the fact that it cost him not much money because Brittany actually helped in the economic sense. Furthermore, he had really good trade with Brittany, so he wanted to support their relationship. The part where the Breton crisis falls apart is in with the Peace of Etaples in November the 3rd, 1492, when he made a treaty with France after the siege of Calais. And basically, even though this was in some ways an economic success because France ended up paying England the French pension, which is about £159,000, or I think something like 749,000 crowns at the time. It was also a failure because it ended in a war he had to pay for, and he also lost trade with Brittany. Or this is kind of overshadowed by the fact he gained a lot of trade with France. Now, if we backtrack a bit, we actually start with the Treaty of Medina del Campo in March 26th of 1489, which is a treaty with Spain, which kind of defined English and Spanish relations for a long time. And this treaty is actually not only important in an economic sense, but also important in securing the dynasty. But I'll come on to that in just a moment. Now, if we continue down, by the way, that's economically important because it helped, because Spain was exploring the New World. They could increase trade with England and gain new products, and also because they reduced tariffs and tolls to benefit both countries. Now, if we move down to just past 1495 to the 1496, we have the Intercursus Magnus and later on the Intercursus Manus, which are trade deals made with Burgundy. Now, this is really interesting because the Lady of Burgundy, Margaret, was actually Richard III, but that's the Duke of Gloucester's sister, meaning that she was very close to Richard III and would see Henry VII, who had killed Richard, as her enemy. So actually achieving trade deals with Burgundy was a major success. Even though it was with Philip of Burgundy, just the ability to limit the tolls and make the speedy redress of merchants a lot easier was just a great success. Similarly with the Treaty of Ayton, it defined the peace between Scotland and England, ending the war between them, and later led to the Treaty of Perpetual Peace, which was probably the treaty that had the most long-lasting effect. Now, as we can see, he's doing an okay job of avoiding war with Burgundy. He also avoided the war with the Holy Roman Empire, which was basically Germany. And he avoided war with Venice when he was moving on their trade deal. So he's doing a pretty good job. However, one of his main problems was Perkin Warbeck, who pretended to be Richard of York, not Richard III, but one of the princes who was in the Tower. Now, Perkin Warbeck makes his first appearance in 1491 in Ireland, where he claims that he is Richard of York and that he should be on the throne. Now, Ireland is a kind of a major problem for Henry VII, as it's a continuous thorn in his side. England and as a whole does not have much authority there even now, and it's always been like that. Even though Henry did try to gain some control over there by sending over magistrates, Ireland was kind of a failure for his foreign policy because he never really gained control there. And Perkin Warbeck is a perfect example of this, as he first made his appearance there and gained a lot of support there. Now, Perkin Warbeck actually moved to France after this, but once again we see the Peace of the Templars in December 1492, when basically after the siege of Calais, the King of France stops harbouring Perkin, and this is another success for the foreign policy. It shows that Henry does have influence over other countries in Europe. Now, Perkin Warbeck then goes over to England and invades England, which is a major problem because once again, war is occurring, and he's using supplies from Burgundy. So in some ways, this is a failure for his foreign policy because it shows how easily other European powers are willing to work against him, especially because Margaret of Burgundy was Richard III's sister and probably hates Henry. However, once again, the intercursus magnus means that Philip of Burgundy starts supporting Perkin Warbeck, and they get all those trade deals, which is a great success considering how much hatred there must have been between Margaret of Burgundy and Henry VII. Perkin Warbeck then goes to Scotland. He's definitely moving around here, and he then invades England with a Scottish force. But once again, the Treaty of Ayton means that the Scottish stop supporting Perkin Warbeck, and there's peace between Scotland and England probably for the first time in around 200 years. And then finally, Perkin tries to invade through Cornwall, but completely fails. And that kind of shows how, even though there were several attempts to invade England, which were failures for his foreign policy, he was able to successfully defeat the pretenders and the rebellions, which is also a great success. Now, finally, if we go over to how he secured his dynasty and his recognition through marriage, if we go down here, the first point of note is actually, if we get that to focus for a sec, is actually the Medina del Campo, which is the treaty that was made with Spain. As not only did it work through trade, but it also worked through securing a marriage between Prince Arthur, Henry VII's eldest son, and Catherine of Aragon, who was the daughter of one of, I think it was the King of Spain. Now, if we go down, their marriage doesn't actually occur until 1501, and it is struck by tragedy when Arthur dies in 1502. Although Catherine said that the marriage was never consummated, later marrying Henry VIII, this was a severe knock. However, Spanish and English relations were actually really strong during this period. Further down, we once again have the Treaty of Ayton in 1497. Now, so far, the Treaty of Ayton has ended the war between England and Scotland and created trade between them, and now it's secured by Margaret Tudor, Henry's eldest daughter, marrying James IV of Scotland. Now, the really important thing about these marriages is that it legitimizes his children. Before this point, because of his weak claim to the throne, even though he was married to Elizabeth of York, who had a strong claim, he was seen by some as a pretender, especially the Yorkist supporters. So by marrying them into other royal families, he was legitimizing his children and securing the dynasty. Now, if we come down here, a really important point across all of these areas is the Treaty of Perpetual Peace. Now, that's kind of a follow-on from the Treaty of Ayton, the Scottish one in 1497. Now, this one takes place in 1502, which we see over here. And it's really important because of the fact that although it was broken in 1513 when they went back to war, it allowed to lead the merging of Scotland and England in the early 1600s after the death of Elizabeth I, when Margaret's great grandchild and James's James the Sixth actually took over and inherited the English throne. Kind of even though it's not the direct Tudor line, it was definitely securing his dynasty in some way. Now, I've kind of got just a really quick overview of several of the really broad points involved in Henry VII's foreign policy, but there are several other areas to consider really quickly. If we look over here, when considering whether Henry's policies were weak or if they weren't strong, then you have to measure up his successes against his failures. Now, one really good way to measure his successes and failures is to look at his personal aims, which, as we said before, were to develop trade, avoid war, defeat pretenders and rebels, and establish a dynasty. And as we've discussed, he did succeed in almost all of those areas, except for avoiding war, in which he did have the Breton Crisis and his war with Scotland. If we come really over to end, there are tons of other areas you can talk about with Henry VII's foreign policy. You could talk about his work with Venice and Florence, the trade war between them, trying to gain deals with Florence, even though Venice was working against them, as Venice was a major trading city at this time. And there's tons of other things you can find if you look online and podcasts and anything I can recommend. But overall, that is the broader sense I could talk about the foreign policy. Anyway, if you are watching this, I don't know why you would be, but thanks for watching. Hope you might have learned something. Please subscribe and like down below, and thanks for watching.